In 1958, a man working alone in a New York apartment built a preamp so pure that engineers still study the circuit today. Decades later, nothing has truly surpassed it. That single fact should make you uneasy about modern audio. A preamp is the brain of every serious system, the stage where the signal is weakest and most easily destroyed. Modern convenience has quietly convinced a generation to skip it. These 7 machines prove what gets lost when you do. For most of the 1950s and 1960s, your entire hi-fi system lived inside one box. The preamp was just another circuit board crammed in alongside the power amplifier, sharing the same power supply, soaking in the same electrical noise, and compromising at every turn. It worked, but it was never allowed to be great because the environment inside that shared chassis would not let it be. Then engineers started asking a dangerous question. What happens if you pull the preamp out, give it its own chassis, its own dedicated power supply, and its own clean electrical environment? The answer changed everything. The signal quality improved so dramatically that once you heard the difference, going back felt like putting on dirty glasses. By the mid-1970s, the separates revolution was in full swing. Tubes versus solid state. Minimalist versus feature-rich. Neutrality versus musicality. Designers were chasing fundamentally different visions of what a preamp should do, and the result was a golden era of variety and craftsmanship. Here is where the watchdog steps in. The modern industry is quietly reversing that entire revolution. DACs with built-in volume controls, streaming boxes that claim to replace the preamp. The pitch is convenience. The reality is the same corner-cutting the separates movement was built to escape. Number 7. The Hafler DH101. David Hafler was not some unknown tinkerer. He co-founded Dynaco, one of the most important hi-fi companies of the early stereo era. So when he left and started his own brand in the late 1970s, he already knew exactly where the industry was wasting your money. His answer was the DH101, a preamp you could buy fully assembled, or, and this is the part that made the establishment nervous, as a kit you built yourself at your kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon. The assembled version was affordable. The kit was almost absurdly cheap. And yet on the test bench and in serious listening sessions, it went toe-to-toe with preamps costing 3 to 5 times more. The circuit design was genuinely excellent. Hafler simply refused to spend money on anything that did not directly serve the signal. No fancy casework, no dealer markup, no glossy advertising campaign. Just the circuit, clean and honest. And that is the watchdog lesson sitting right inside the box. You are almost always paying for the enclosure, the brand story, and the retail chain, not the parts that actually touch your music. Hafler proved a kit built on a kitchen counter could embarrass a showroom flagship. Judge the signal path, never the badge. Number 6. The Counterpoint SA5000. If Hafler was the people's champion, this one is closer to a ghost story. Mike Elliott founded Counterpoint in California and built something the purists said could not work. He married vacuum tubes in the preamp stage to solid-state output buffers, creating a hybrid design that combined tube warmth with transistor grip and control. The SA5000 was his masterpiece, a dual chassis beast with its own separate power supply. Stunning internal build quality, and a sound so seductive that reviewers ran out of adjectives trying to describe it. And then the company went bankrupt in the late 1990s. Elliott kept going under a new name, Alta Vista Audio, personally modifying and upgrading surviving units for years, essentially becoming the afterlife mechanic for his own creations. Finding a stock S, a 5000 today, is already difficult. Finding one Elliott personally upgraded before his passing is the kind of thing collectors talk about the way car people talk about a matching numbers classic. Here is the watchdog lesson that hits hardest. The designer outlived the company, and the circuit outlived both. A machine with no app, no firmware, and no corporate support is still being hunted and cherished decades later. Meanwhile, smart audio gear from 5 years ago is already bricked because the server it depended on got shut down. Ask yourself which one was actually built to last. Number 5. The Croft Micro25. Glenn Croft has been building preamps by hand in a small workshop in the English countryside for over 40 years. No corporation behind him, no factory floor, no marketing department. Just one man, a soldering iron, and a design philosophy that borders on monastic. Every unit is hand-wired, point-to-point, not machine-assembled on a printed circuit board. Every solder joint is made by the same person who designed the circuit it belongs to. The Micro25 is a minimalist tube preamp stripped down to its absolute essence. No remote control, no balanced connections, no DAC module, no concession to modern convenience whatsoever. What it does have is a signal path so short and so pure that listeners routinely describe the experience as instruments physically appearing in the room, and it costs a fraction of what the prestige brands charge for comparable or genuinely lesser sonic performance. That gap between price and sound is the entire watchdog lesson. The hi-fi industry sells you features. Croft sells you the absence of everything that does not serve the music. No remote, no display, no network connection, and it sounds better than boxes costing 10 times as much because every single penny went into the signal path and nothing else. Sometimes the most advanced engineering decision a designer can make is knowing exactly what to leave out. Number 4. The Audible Illusions. Modulus 3. A. Art Ferris built Audible Illusions out of a small facility in California, and the Modulus 3A became one of the most reviewed and most recommended tube preamps in American hi-fi history. It offered a full-featured tube-line stage paired with an exceptional built-in phono stage, which was critical for anyone serious about vinyl playback. And it did all of this at a price that undercut the established names by a margin wide enough to make them uncomfortable. The sound was lush, dynamic, and immediately engaging. This was the kind of preamp that made people sit down and listen to entire albums again instead of skipping through tracks looking for the good parts. Production was slow, hand-built, and sometimes frustratingly backlogged. Ordering one meant waiting, sometimes for months. But the people who waited almost universally said the same thing once it arrived. Nothing else at the price came close. Not even in the same neighborhood. And that is the watchdog lesson that never gets old. Scale is not quality. The biggest companies with the biggest factories and the biggest advertising budgets are not automatically building the best-sounding gear. A tiny operation with a single obsessive designer, zero marketing spend, and a waiting list produced a preamp that audiophile publications could not stop recommending for over a decade. The size of the company tells you nothing. The ears of the designer tell you everything. Number 3. The Conrad Johnson Premier 7. Conrad Johnson was founded in Virginia in the late 1970s, and from the very beginning, the company planted its flag in a single, almost philosophical position. Music should sound beautiful, not just correct. Their preamps were unapologetically warm, lush, and harmonically rich at a time when the rest of the industry was chasing clinical precision on a spec sheet. The Premier 7 was their ultimate statement. A two-chassis, all-tube design with a fully separate power supply, hand-selected components, and the kind of build quality that told you this was the end of the line. This was the best Conrad Johnson knew how to build, and they wanted you to feel that the moment you lifted the lid. It also sat at the dead center of hi-fi's longest-running argument. Should a preamp be perfectly neutral? A straight wire with gain that adds nothing and takes nothing away? Or should it add its own character, its own warmth and bloom, to make recordings sound closer to what live instruments actually do in a real room? Conrad Johnson's answer was that perfect neutrality is itself a kind of distortion, because real music in real space has body and richness that clinical circuits strip away, and that is the watchdog lesson that cuts deeper than any specification. Two preamps can measure almost identically on a test bench, and sound completely different in your living room. The numbers tell you what the machine does electrically. They never tell you what it does emotionally. Anyone selling you audio purely on measurements is telling you half the story and hoping you will not ask about the other half. Number 2. The Audio Research SP10. William Zane Johnson founded Audio Research in Minneapolis and then did something the rest of the industry thought was borderline insane. While every major manufacturer was sprinting toward transistors, declaring vacuum tubes obsolete, and quietly shutting down their tube production lines, Johnson doubled down. He bet his entire company on the idea that tubes were not nostalgic relics, but genuinely superior tools for reproducing music. The SP10 was the machine that proved him right. It was big. It ran hot. It required tube replacements. It was expensive. And none of that mattered to the people who actually sat down in front of one and listened. The SP10 had a combination of transparency, three-dimensionality, and sheer musical presence that the solid-state preamps of its era simply could not replicate. Music did not just play through it. Music occupied the room because of it. Audio Research built these machines to be serviced and maintained indefinitely. Schematics were available. Parts were documented. The company fully expected you to own this preamp for decades, not discard it in 2 years when the next model dropped. And the watchdog lesson buried in that story is as brutal as it is simple. Consensus is not quality. The fact that every big brand has stampeded in one direction does not mean that direction is better. It very often just means it is cheaper to manufacture. The crowd follows cost. The best gear follows the signal. Johnson ignored the entire industry, trusted his own ears, and built one of the most respected preamps in the history of recorded sound. The mainstream called him a dinosaur. The music proved him a prophet. Number 1. The Marantz 7. This is where the entire story begins, and, in a way, where it ends. Saul Marantz was an obsessive perfectionist who built his first preamp by hand in a New York apartment in the early 1950s. He was not an engineer by training. He was a man who loved music and could not find a piece of equipment good enough to reproduce it the way he heard it in his head. So he built his own. The Model 7, released around 1958, became the preamp that defined the entire concept of high fidelity. At its heart was a phono stage so refined that engineers still study the circuit topology today, not as history, but as education. The signal-to-noise ratio was remarkable for its era, or, frankly, for any era since. And the sonic result was a presentation so natural, so completely free of electronic artifacts, that listeners stopped hearing equipment and started hearing music. That distinction sounds subtle. It is actually everything. Original units are now treated like fine art. Clean, unmolested examples command serious collector prices and are fought over the moment they surface. Replicas and tribute circuits exist across the entire industry, all trying to recapture what Saul Marantz achieved with a handful of vacuum tubes and an almost unreasonable refusal to accept good enough. The Marantz 7 was never surpassed. Like the Pioneer SX 1980 in the receiver world, it sits at the end of a philosophy. The last pure expression of a moment before mass production, cost engineering, and shareholder pressure made this kind of obsessive, uneconomical perfectionism impossible to justify on a balance sheet. Nobody builds a Marantz 7 anymore because nobody is allowed to. The spreadsheet will not permit it. The machine was born from one person's refusal to compromise, and that species of product is nearly extinct. The king was never beaten. The industry simply decided that crowning kings had become too expensive. These 7 machines span decades, countries, and wildly different philosophies. Tubes, solid-state, hybrid, kit-built, hand-wired, factory-assembled. What every single one shares is that it was designed by someone who cared more about the signal than the spreadsheet. A dedicated preamp is still the single biggest upgrade most systems will ever get, and the one the industry has the least incentive to sell you, because it lasts too long and works too well. The best gear does not ask for updates, it asks for music.